Shalom.
Shalom.
Hello and good morning to all of you in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ.
Morning.
You know, as I get older, a lot of my memory is starting to become fuzzy. There's a lot of things that Joanne will remember that when she mentions it to me, I don't have a clue what she's talking about. But there are still a few things that I remember very well. And one of those things is an event that happened when I was a junior in high school, which meant I was probably 16 years old. And I had two really good friends when I was in high school. One was the name of Bob, and Bob was a senior. And my other friend was David. He was a year younger, so I think he was a sophomore. Dave and Bob had known each other for a few years before I came onto the scene. So I kind of grafted in with them, but it was clear. You remember when you were growing up in your neighborhood and you always hung out, I call them a gang, but a group of people. You know, we had a group of boys in the neighborhood, probably 8 of them, that every day after school, we planned out where we were going to play baseball or football or basketball, wiffle ball, go swimming, the same group. And Bob, myself, and Dave were kind of the leaders of that group. So one day we were in my driveway shooting hoops. And one of them, I can't remember exactly, but it was probably Bob because he wasn't as, and don't laugh, but he wasn't as athletic as myself or David, threw up a shot that just totally missed a hoop. You all know those shots. And that just goes a mile away from the basket, and you argue over who's going to go get the ball. Well, I went and got the ball. And as I went and got it, I started hearing some noises behind me. I didn't think much of it, but when I turned around, I saw Bob and David on the ground wrestling, which I thought they were wrestling, play wrestling. You know, boys do that. They wrestle. Well, this wasn't a wrestling match. As I grabbed the ball and started heading back, I saw punches being thrown. And I got up to them, and it was a pretty serious fight. Now boys fight. And the one thing that I've always thought of with boys or men is they can have a disagreement, but usually within a certain amount of time you both get over it and life goes on. Well, this wasn't one of those cases, unfortunately. So I was paralyzed. I didn't know what to do. You know, I was sitting there watching my two friends pummel each other. So what do I do? Do I jump in and break it up? Do I run away? Well, I couldn't do that because it was in my driveway, so running away and putting my head in the sand was not a very good option. Was I rooting for one of them over the other? I found myself thinking that. Who do I want to win this fight? You know, one of them's going to win, and I kind of knew who. So I was really confused, and I stood there, and it seems like forever, watching those two grapple. Well, I finally did get in between them and broke up the fight, because you know what? I started getting extremely sad. And I almost remember crying, watching two friends fight like that. But I finally got in, split them up. Bob was beaten up pretty bad. I mean, he had a bloody lip, and so I tried to talk. Words didn't really come out. Bob went that way, running to his home, and David stood there with me. And I tried to talk to Dave to see what had happened, but he didn't want to talk about it, and he went his way home. Well, Bob was about to graduate from high school, and he did, and he went on to college. I never saw Bob again after that fight. Now, I saw Dave because he was younger and we hung out together, and any attempts I made to bring up the fight were kind of, you know, we had a misunderstanding. It's been a long time coming. You know, I'm glad it's over. Who needs him? So life just went on. You know what? 40-something years later, I still regret that whole situation. I do. Because Jesus tells us, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children or the sons of God. And I know I broke up the fight, but I don't think I was much of a peacemaker I don't think I did much to bring the two sides together. Actually, I didn't do anything. I just let it happen. Now, again, the easy thing to say is, well, Mark, he was 16 years old. Come on. Okay, maybe. But does things like that happen to us today? I'm almost 60. There are things in my life that I see going around that I could step in and do things a little better. So when Jesus says those words, that peacemakers will be called the children of God, what is he trying to tell us? Well, how is he trying to motivate us into action? A working definition of the word peacemaker is someone who is actively seeking to reconcile people or groups of people, first of all, one to another. So in the case of myself, I was the third party who was trying to be a peacemaker between my two friends. But there are also cases where there is no third party, where it's just you and me, and we may have a disagreement, and we need to work it out amongst each other. The word peacemaker is made up of two very common words, peace and maker. The word for peace is the Hebrew word shalom, the word which I greeted you all today. That word means hello or goodbye, and it's a very broad term that can relate to health, prosperity, harmony, and wholeness. It means perfect welfare, serenity, fulfillment, freedom from trouble, and liberation from anything which hinders contentment. When the Jews said shalom, they were wishing on another the full presence, peace, and prosperity of God. You remember the famous benediction of Numbers chapter 6, when God tells Moses to say the following to the children of Israel. On this wise ye shall bless the children of Israel, saying unto them, the Lord bless thee and keep thee. The Lord make his face to shine upon thee, and be gracious unto thee. The Lord lift up his countenance upon thee, and give thee peace. It is important to remember that peace in the Bible is always based on justice and righteousness. Where justice prevails and righteousness rules, there you will also have peace. But without these two virtues, lasting peace is not possible. The word make in the term peacemakers comes from a Greek verb that means to do or to make. It's an action word. It is a word bursting with energy. Someone has to drag the combatants together around a table and to figure out where it all went wrong and how do we correct the situation. And you notice in the Beatitude where Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers, he doesn't say the peace wishers or the peace hopers or the peace dreamers or the peace lovers. He says the peace makers, those who actively pursue peace. Those are people that take initiative, and those brothers and sisters are those who are doing the will of God. So when we take the two words together, peace and maker, it describes someone who is actively pursuing peace. Unfortunately, and I'm speaking for myself, I won't speak for any of you, I've read these words, I don't know, thousands of times. Peacemakers, the children of God. And most of the time I think to myself, well, that's nice. That's beautiful. But peacemaking sometimes isn't nice. It's not going to be fun, is it? It can be messy, and it's work sometimes to be a peacemaker. You know, I think of it, as you know, a lot of you, I love to go up to New Hampshire, up to the mountains. And lots of times you come across those streams coming down from the mountains. And I look and I see the rocks. And I go, I'm going to cross this stream and I'm going to go walk across those rocks. And you know the rocks are slippery. You know when you go out there, there's a decent chance you could slip and fall. But boy, I want to get to the other side. I want to make it. And most of the time, Joanne grabs me and says, Mark, you're too old to do that. Don't do it. All right? But I'm still in my 30s in my mind. I still want to do that. And that's what peacemaking is like. You know, you have to want to cross that stream. You know you're going to have rocks in the way. You might slip. You might fall. And brothers and sisters, you might not make it. You might get halfway there and have to turn around and come back. And that's okay. You know, it's okay. But that's what we're told to do. Peacemakers. You know, we have to give that effort. Romans 12, verse 18, Paul exhorts us, if it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. Boy, that's hard. Especially the brotherhood. We are to be at peace. Now, we may not all agree, but we are to live peaceably one with another. That's a pretty clear command, isn't it? You know, not only are we supposed to love and have faith in our Lord Jesus Christ, but we are supposed to follow his commands. And that's one of his commands. But Paul adds something to it. He says, if it be possible. And sometimes we know it isn't. And we've all had people in our lives. I've had coworkers that, you know, if I say the sky is blue, they say, no, it isn't. It's green. It's black. It's, you know, they're just some people that we're just not going to make total peace with. But we can always agree to disagree in an agreeable way, right? Something that's totally contradictory to the politicians nowadays. You know, they can't agree to disagree. There always has to be vitriol behind everything. But we can agree to disagree. And what a beautiful reading this morning. I got to saw my granddaughter yesterday, and that's kind of what prompted me to choosing this story of Abigail, the peacemaker. And it couldn't have been easy for Abigail, married to Nabal. I mean, we know, you know, he seems to be the type of man that when you meet him, you'll never forget him. You know, oh yeah, I remember that guy. Wow. You know, he's a hard, churlish, evil man. Mean, arrogant, and brash. And we know his name means foolish. And he almost incites a war by not taking in and helping David's men. And of course, in steps Abigail. You know, David's here with his men coming to fight her husband. And instead of standing by watching it all happen, she takes action. Great example. You know, David organizes his armies. He's ready to shed blood, acting more like, you know, one of those Western bandits than a future king. But with wisdom, she discerned how to repair an extremely heated situation. And we know the story how she approaches David with humility and kindness and brings healing to a gaping wound. You know, she really responds in such a beautiful way. It mirrors the heart of Jesus, doesn't it? Who mirrors his Father. And we know that this peace for Nabal only lasted a short time as he ends up dying. But, you know, this is a great example for us. And we know how much Jesus values peacemaking and wants us to be peacemakers to the best of our ability. You know, one of the accounts I think of when I think of Jesus is the adulterous woman in John 8, where she's about, you know, the people bring her to Jesus and say, this woman was found in adultery. You know, and what does he do? He acts as a peacemaker. He said, no, it doesn't say, I don't think, if they were going to stone her or what they were going to do to her, but I'm sure it wasn't anything good. And Jesus says, let him without sin cast the first stone. And calm the whole situation down. And that's what Jesus is looking for us, to the best of our ability to calm situations down. It's divine work, I think, brothers and sisters, isn't it? And it's something we really need to pray for and pray on every day. You know, because our human nature is to lash out. When someone wrongs Mark, Mark's going to get you back. That's not how we're supposed to be. Jesus was the greatest example of that. So peacemakers, that's what I really want us to think on today and every day, to the best of our ability. How can we be peacemakers? We know Jesus, and I use the word peacemaker and not peacekeeper because there's a difference. The difference is a peacekeeper tends to try to make, both sides happy all the time, right? I think of Jimmy Carter. He was a peacekeeper. He tried to keep peace between Egypt and Israel, but, all the underlying stuff still goes on in the world over there and so on and so forth. But a peacemaker, isn't as concerned, I think of it as more than putting duct tape on a situation like being a peacekeeper is. Jesus came to establish peace. His death, as we know, purchased peace for us. The words Jesus always would say, go in peace. It was much more than just trying to keep both sides happy. Sometimes being a peacemaker, you may make one of both sides not happy because you need to speak the truth. And they may not want to hear that. So it can be a little bit of work. And we know that Jesus' life was saturated with this mission of bringing the peace of God and to initiate healing relationships among groups of people. And he paid an enormous price for us to experience peace. That word in the beatitude of peacemaker is applied by Paul to some of his writings. He says in Colossians 1, verse 20, to reconcile everything to himself by making peace through the blood of his cross. Furthermore, Paul informed us that Jesus might create in himself one new man from the two, resulting in peace. Jesus knows our situation, our gravity of our problem, and he refused, didn't he, to just stand there and watch everything happen. He took action, and he knew that the only way to help us toward peace was by the shedding of his blood on the cross. So how do we go about it? Jesus has given his life for us so that we can enjoy peace. One of the things is comfort. We're comforted by the grace that we have been given through the sacrifice of Christ. We have peace. And one of the commandments is for us to be peacemakers. So how do we start? You've been wronged. You feel like you've been wronged. Well, the first one's an obvious one, and you probably already know what it is. We have to pray on it. We have to talk to God about it. We have to talk to God, bring the situation out truthfully. This is what happened to me, but this is what I did. Don't sugarcoat God. God won't be mocked. He knows what happened. We need to be truthful when we speak to him and pray for a way to resolve it. How do I resolve it? What do I do? And you know what? This is the toughest part. It's taking the first step. When there's not a third party involved, Jesus is very clear on this, isn't he? You remember in Matthew 5, he tells us, if we're offering your gift on an altar, and you remember that your brother has something against you, what does he say? Leave the gift. First, go reconcile yourself to your brother, and then come back and offer your gift. That's pretty clear. It's pretty clear. Later, Jesus says, if your brother sins against you, go speak to him in private. And if he listens to you, you've won your brother. We're to make the first move, and that's one of the hardest things to do. It's one of the hardest things to do. In the times I've tried it, with one or two different people, most of the time I've hit a brick wall. And that's okay. That's going to happen. But we need to make the effort. Because there's got to come a time when it's too late to reconcile with that brother, that sister, that family member, that friend. And in the case with myself and Bob, it's too late. The time to do that was 40 years ago. And, at the time I didn't do anything. So when you take the first step to speak to the other person, some encouraging words from Solomon and Paul. Solomon wrote, "A gentle answer turns away anger, but harsh words stir up wrath." And Paul wrote, "No rotten talk should come from your mouth, but only what is good for the building up of someone in need, in order to give grace to those who hear." That's found in Ephesians 4. So we need to empathize with their feelings. And that's one thing going through my management classes at work, I'm always told to do. Mark, you need to empathize with someone else's feelings before you speak to them about something you're trying to correct them on or encourage them on. And we need to do the same. And we need to remember our role in the situation. You may feel that Joe is 95% in the wrong and maybe you're a few percent, but you're still a few percent, so you did help cause the situation. So we need to remember that too. So Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, because they will be called the children or sons of God." And for us, brothers and sisters, this should mean something to us. When you think of children or sons, you think of family. And when you think of family, many times people will say, "Mark, you look like your dad." And I said, well, that's great, physical appearance-wise, but inside, do I reflect the same as my dad does? Do I reflect the love and the care and the grace of Jesus and God? That's what when we're called children of God, that's what that means. You're reflecting Jesus in your lives, and that's something I need to ask myself every day. Do I do that? Do people see me and see something in me that they say, boy, Mark's different. Mark got this confidence, peace, comfort within him. He's someone I can talk to. And that can be tough in our everyday lives, can't it? It might be easy to do and say when we're here, when we're at Bible school, when we're with each other, but in our everyday lives, it can be a tough thing. We must first have the experience and live the shalom of God in our lives to offer that peace to others. All right? We need to have it first. We need to be built up, comforted, and have that shalom within our lives to do that. When Paul, and in many of his letters, begins, "Grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ." Many of his letters, he says grace and peace. He doesn't use the words peace and grace because the grace comes first, doesn't it? And then you receive the peace. Brothers and sisters, through the grace of God and the sacrifice of Christ, you have received that peace. I have received that peace. Philippians 4 reminds us that through this grace and peace, let that peace which passeth all understanding keep your hearts and minds through Jesus Christ. Like comfort, we are to share our comfort that we've been given to others, and the same comes for this peace. Jesus laid down his life for us in order that we may experience everlasting peace. And he has a commandment for us. Blessed are the peacemakers, that they will be called the children of God.